Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Monk Chat. We will start by chanting the Ratana Sutta together, and then after that, you can ask whatever questions you would like to ask, and we'll answer them as best we can. As usual, please start with a maximum of 2 questions per person. Then if we go through all the questions and there's still time, then you can ask additional questions. So welcome to the friends checking in. So welcome Elaine, Jens, Gita, Liz, Mona, Sally, Bradley, and Lilia. Happy to see all of you joining in.
Great, we have 2 neighbors, Mona and Bradley, and 1 former neighbor, Liz. Wonderful, good to see you.
And welcome also Edward.
Yeah, welcome Edward. 1 somewhat neighbor, because he's in Manhattan, so kind of close by.
And we'll go ahead and start with the chanting. So please join in with chanting the Ratana Sutta. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Yani bhutani samagatani bhummani vayani vantaleke. Sabeva bhuta sumana bhavantu atopi sakacha sunantu bhasitam. Tasmahi bhutani sameta sabe metam karota manusiya pajaya. Devacharato chaharanti eva ling tasmahi nevrakata apamata. Yan kinchivitang idavahuram vasage suvayam ratanam paritam. Nano samangati tathagatena idampi buddhe ratanam panitam. Etena sachena suvati hotu. Kayam viragam namatam panitam yadanjagasa kyamuni samahito. Natena dhammena samati kinchi edampi dhamme ratanam panitam. Etena sachena suvati hotu. Yang buddha seto parivannayi suchim samadhimanandari kanyamahu. Samadhinatena samona vijjati dampi dhamme ratanam panitam. Etena sachena suvati hotu. Ye bhungala atasatang pasata chatari etani yogani honti. Te dakineya sugata sasavaka ete sudinnani mahapalani. Vedampi sanghe ratanam panitang etena sachena suvati hotu. Ye sopayota manasa dalhena nekamino gotamasasanamhi. Te patipata matam vigaiha lantamudanim buddhim punjamana. Vedampi sanghe ratanam panitang etena sachena suvati hotu. Yatinna kilo patavingsito siya chatum vivate via sampakampiyo. Tatupamang samburisang vadami yo arya sachani avechapasati. Idampi sanghe ratanam panitang etena sachena suvati hotu. Ye arya sachani vipavayanti gambhira panyena sudesitani. Kinchapi te honti pusapamata na te bhavanga tamanga diyanti. Idampi sanghe ratanang panitang etena sachena suvati hotu. Sahava sadasana sampadaya taya sudhamma jahita bhavanti. Sakaya deti vichike chitancha silabhatang vapi adati kinchi. Chatuhapaye cha vipamoto chachabhitanani avambokatum. Idampi sanghe ratanang panitang etena sachena suvati hotu. Kinchapi sokam mangaroti papakam kayena vacha uracheta sava. Avambo sotasa patichadaya avambatadita padasa bhuta. Idampi sanghe ratanang panitang etena sachena suvati hotu. Vanapagumbe yata usidhange gimhanamase patamasmingime. Tatupamang dhammavarangadhe sayinim vanagaming varamang idaya. Idampi buddhe ratanang panitang etena sachena suvati hotu. Varo varanyo varado varaharo anutaro dhammavarangadhe sayi. Idampi buddhe ratanang panitang etena sachena suvati hotu. Kinang puranang navang nati sambhavang virata citta ayatike bhavasming.
Tekina
Bija vibruhin chanda nimbanti dhiraya tayang paripo. Idampi sanghe ratanang panitang etena sachena suvati hotu. Yani bhutani samagatani bhummani vayani va antaleke. Tathagatam deva manusabhujitang buddhang namasama suvati hotu. Yani bhutani samagatani bhummani vayani va antaleke. Tathagatam deva manusabhujitang dhammam namasama suvati hotu. Yani bhutani samagatani bhummani vayani va antaleke. Tathagatam deva manusabhujitang sangham namasama suvati hotu. Etena sacha vanjena dukavo pasamnentu te. Etena sacha vanjena vayavo pasamentu te. Etena sacha vanjena rogavo pasamentu te. Okay, lovely. So please go ahead and put in your questions and we'll do our best to answer them in line with the Dhamma. So let's start first off with welcoming some more friends. Welcome Olga. First time, well, welcome. First time for everything. Welcome Denise, Ethan, Catalina, and James. Happy to see you all joining in. Marielle says, me and my 15 plants that listen to the Dharma.
Lovely.
Well, yes, there might even be devas who live in your plants that enjoy listening to the Dharma. There's one really cute sutta where a monk looks closely at a plant and he sees a bunch of little tiny devas living on the plant. So I find this adorable. Sometimes people think that devas only live in like big trees, but also you'll find devas living in little tiny plants and flowers and such. In fact, there's a place which talks about the flower devas. So devas who live inside flowers. Anyway, so I hope the devas and your plants enjoy listening to the Dhamma. So first question, do you want to go first?
How about you go first and then we'll see.
Okay. So Sally asks, how to best use chanda instead of loba to set goals? One sutta Bhante explained loba, greed is like owing debts. I feel like after I plan to do something, the unsatisfactory thoughts of not done yet arise frequently, and is exactly the feeling of owing debt. Even an expectation for the body to recover but still suffer a lot is a feeling of owing debt. But in reality, do have goals / expectations / things to do. So use chanda maybe as a way to overcome debt feeling. Well, first off, I should point out that there's in most of the suttas, there's not a strong differentiation between chanda and loba. So chanda is a bit softer. So loba very, very clearly means greed. It's like this very strong craving and desire, this obsessive wanting. Chanda is a bit softer. It's more like an interest in something, an interest in doing something. But it also usually carries a negative connotation, an unwholesome meaning of an unwholesome desire for something. But chanda is occasionally used in a positive sense of meaning an interest in doing something wholesome, an interest in cultivating wholesome qualities. It's less common, but it is sometimes used in that way. For example, Dhamma chanda, an interest in the Dhamma, desire for the Dhamma. So that's fine. And as for the distinction that you're making here, so the main problem that we have with goals and expectations and things to do is, again, the expectations. We expect to get particular results. We want particular results. We tell ourselves, if I don't get the results I want, then I will be unhappy. If I don't get the results I want, then that will be terrible. I must get the desired results or else that will be awful. This is the story that we tell ourselves, and that's what produces the discomfort. On the other hand, if we have a goal and we work towards it, but with a mind of equanimity, being totally okay whether we reach our goal or not, then we can do so with peacefulness. You can still work towards your goal with just as much sincerity and diligence, but knowing that whether you reach the goal or not ultimately isn't a problem. Because the most important thing is cultivating the mind of awakening, the mind of enlightenment, not achieving worldly goals. If your goal is something related to the Dhamma, then it's similar, because you also know that you don't really need to worry about achieving the goal. You just need to focus on creating the causes for the goal, the conditions for the goal. And that's something that you do right here in the present moment. So as long as you're creating the causes and conditions that eventually will result in wholesome accomplishments, then you don't need to worry about when it will happen or how it will happen or what it might be like. You just don't need to go into that at all. You can just rejoice in the fact that you're creating the right causes and conditions. So this should overcome all of these feelings that you're talking about, because then they just fall away. So usually that uncomfortable feeling, that what you call the feeling of debt, that uncomfortable feeling is related to this desperate craving to get a particular result and this fear that we won't get the result that we want. So you just start right off the bat accepting that you might not get what you want, and that's totally okay, no problem. But that you will just do the work of creating wholesome causes and conditions, knowing with full faith and confidence that when you create wholesome causes, you get wholesome results. Then there's no feeling of debt. There's just the feeling of joy in the wholesome. Okay?
Right, and James is asking, how can we support asuba as a main practice? As in, what is a good shamatha subject to pair with it? I think this is a good question for you.
Well, first off, it's important to know what you mean by asuba practice, because I've noticed over the years that a lot of people have a deep misunderstanding of asuba practice. A lot of people believe that asuba practice means cultivating disgust towards bodies, and that's not the practice at all. Or they think that it's about cultivating revulsion towards the physical world, towards sensory experiences, towards food, and towards any kind of enjoyable activities. And that's, again, not it at all. So asuba just means non-beautiful. So asuba practice is a practice of viewing everything in the world as being not beautiful. So the point there is to break our desire and attachment. It doesn't mean viewing things as ugly or disgusting or repulsive. It just means viewing them as not beautiful. So seeing things as neutral, as inherently neutral. So there's an old saying, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. In other words, saying that there's no such thing as something which is objectively beautiful. Rather, things are subjectively beautiful. In that one person from one perspective will say it's beautiful, and another person from another perspective will say it's not. So the asuba practice is the practice of seeing things clearly without projecting our concepts of beauty or ugliness onto them. That's what asuba practice actually is. But commonly when people use the word asuba, they're referring specifically to the practice of the 31 parts of the body. Mindfulness of the 31 components of the body: head hair, body hair, nails, teeth, skin, muscles, tendons, bones, etc., etc. And once again, the practice there is to develop a clear awareness of your own body. Again, it's not about disgust per se. It's just about knowing the body inside and out, cultivating a clear, cool, direct awareness of your whole body inside and out. And once again, the result of that is a calm, equanimous, alert mind. So this is very important to keep in mind. If you practice asuba and the result is disgust, irritation, annoyance, then you're not doing it correctly. Something's gone terribly wrong. So with that in mind, then, asuba practice is perfectly fine. Asuba practice is, it's actually the practice of cultivating mindfulness and equanimity, which goes great with basically everything in Buddhism. Mindfulness and equanimity is kind of like your Swiss Army knife of Buddhist meditation. It goes with everything, and it supports everything, and it's supported by everything. And it goes with everything, which is why it's 2 of the 7 factors of enlightenment. These are really critically important qualities to develop in our practice. So what's a good samatha object to pair it with? Oh, mindfulness of the body. It goes perfectly with mindfulness of the body. Yep. As for corpse contemplation, which was the other practice that you mentioned, corpse contemplation is, it's more a practice of mindfulness of death, recollection of death, and also a way of cultivating a perception of not self in regard to your own body. So those are its 2 main uses, which again doesn't have anything to do with asuba. It just has to do with coming face to face with the fact that this body will die and decompose and return to the elements. And 2, accepting that this body is not who we are. It's just a temporary conglomeration of physical elements. That's all. So earlier today, I was doing walking meditation barefoot in the backyard, and I was practicing the 4 elements. And it was actually really delightful. Like the 4 elements meditation is really magical to do outdoors. because the feeling of earth, water, fire, air is so tangible. And the feeling of direct connection with earth, water, heat, and air is so tangible. And you can practically feel your body rooted to the earth. And it's so easy to see how the body came from the earth and will return to the earth. One of my favorite quotes from the Bible is, "From dust you came, and to dust you shall return." Because that's pretty Buddhist, to be perfectly honest. So it's one of those little overlap spots between the Buddha and the Bible. Yeah, so that practice, again, it's not so much a samatha practice, it's an insight practice. Quartz contemplation is a vipassana practice. It's not a samatha practice. Anyway, those are my thoughts on the matter. Would you like to take the next one?
Sure. So Sally is asking, in the last chat regarding Aya's explanation about meditation as a preparatory for everything else, Aya mentioned the monastic life helps in terms of generosity. Could Aya explain more about it? Sure. So, in essence, what do we do when we are practicing generosity? We let go of something. And what is monastic life? Letting go of everything. So it was kind of interesting, actually, being a convert Buddhist. A lot of things in Buddhism weren't particularly obvious to me at the very beginning. Some were, and I quite understood them, but some weren't. And being a monastic, actually, I understood them as a layperson, but I understood them even more becoming a monastic. So, for example, the reason why Buddhist monastics are entirely supported by lay people, the reason why we're not hermits, one can think, especially if one comes from a sort of, which these days actually it's pretty much the entire world, except for a few cultures, that there is the idea, oh, you're kind of like a parasite of society if you're depending on someone else. In American culture, there is very much ingrained the self-sufficiency of people. So the fact that, for example, when I took these vows, one of the most difficult things for me was actually not really shaving my head, not really like letting go of all my clothes and possessions, not really letting go of not handling money anymore, but actually letting go of my independence, or my independence, my idea of like, I'm an independent woman, I don't need anyone. I can make my own money, I can do this, I can do that. So you let go of all of that. It's the biggest practice of generosity, actually. To that, whenever something is offered to you, it's a practice of generosity and non-self. Not thinking, oh, these people are giving it to me, but rather I am, as a member of the monastic Sangha, I'm creating the conditions for people to practice generosity. And I practice generosity by allowing this to happen and by letting go of my pride, by letting go of my preferences. So there's lots of wholesomeness to be cultivated there. And actually all of this, for example, was actually a lesson that I also learned experientially thanks to lay Buddhist people. I always learn a lot from lay Buddhist people. Like May, actually, our resident. I always learn a lot from her. She's great. So she graciously, for example, offered a statue for the monastery that will arrive eventually after the pandemic. Her and also another Thai Buddhist lovely lady, Benz, offered another Buddha Rupa for the monastery outside. And, normally in the past, when people would offer things, like I would always feel bad. Like I would always go like, oh, no, but you shouldn't do this. You don't disturb. No, 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 no. And, like a lot of times when you say thank you to convert people, the answer is like, you're welcome. And born Buddhist people, they always answer, thank you for allowing me to, they thank you. Thank you for allowing me to to practice generosity. So that's the first thing that May said. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to offer the Buddha Rupa to the monastery. So that's when these are precious teachings for me as a converted Buddhist, because I realized that this is much bigger than me, Ayasoma, or me, whatever my name was as a layperson. Me Italian, me this, me whatever. But rather it's being part of a really long tradition, precious tradition of teachings that are rooted in generosity. And by letting go of my ego, by letting go of like my self-centeredness and my self-cherishedness and thinking, oh yes, May is donating it to me because she likes me, which then makes it actually very intense, because I'm like, oh, I'm not worthy of a big Buddha Rupa. No, you shouldn't put this effort into it. Of course I'm not worthy of that generosity. The Buddha says, by the way, that we're never worthy of any type of generosity until we attain awakening. So, there's that. Actually, unless we practice loving kindness. So I try to remember to to practice loving kindness every day, so that I'm worthy of it, at least for that moment. Really, once again, letting go of all of these defilements and enabling others to practice generosity. And remembering that in order, once again, to practice generosity, there always needs to be someone to give something to. So today we distributed several different boxes of vegetables for free to neighbors in need. And at a certain point, we have 2 left. So I had to work a lot to find 2 people who were in need of vegetables. Otherwise, I couldn't be generous, If they sit and rot, that's not being generous. Oh yeah, I'm so generous. There are like boxes there. No. So then I was like, okay, let me see who can need. Let me ask that person who knows that person, who knows that person. And then we found 2 people who needed them. Not people who could use them, bear in mind, but people who needed them.
She actually found 3 people and then gave away also vegetables from our own stores. So it's going this extra step of like, how much can we share? How much can we give? So this also is an aspect where monastic life helps you be more generous, is because you learn how to let go of things. Because in order to be generous, you have to be willing to let go of things. Notice how often we're like, I want to give, but not this. No, I'll keep this for myself. So we're always giving just a little bit. So there's an old saying, and I don't remember where I heard this, give till it hurts. And the meaning of this is to notice that point where our withholding, stingy, selfish mind starts to get in the way of our generosity. Because that's when there starts to be that little pain of like, no, I don't want to give this one, no. And then you ask yourself, it's like, well, actually, can I let go of this and just give this away? And you think, well, actually, it would make these people really happy. So like in our case, if we need more food, well, we never seem to have any trouble getting a hold of food here at the monastery. But the families that we've been helping out, they are having a hard time getting a hold of food. So in our case, if we're running low on vegetables, we'll find a way to get some vegetables. But the families that we're connected with, they don't have anything to turn to. They're really struggling. So it's also that question of like, well, why am I so greedily trying to hold on to some extra vegetables just in case we run out in a few days, when these people have already run out? So give till it hurts. It makes us really question. It's like, why? Why are we unwilling to let go of a little bit extra? What do we actually need versus what do we want to hold on to? Yeah, and also with monastic life, you get to learn what actually is the minimum. The minimum necessity is far less than we usually think it is, especially as lay people. We usually think like, well, if I don't have the PlayStation 6, then that would just be terrible. Well, get real. You don't need it. You think you need it, but you don't. You don't.
Are you sure it's 6, not like 10,
I
11?
just picked a random number. I actually have no idea what they're up to. I mean, when I became a monastic, they were still on PlayStation 1 or PlayStation 2, and I was shocked when I went to visit my brother a few years back, and he had a PlayStation 4, and I was like, "What?"
Maybe it's PlayStation 100.
I don't know. I don't keep track of these things.
All right. Well, let's see what Elaine says. Dear Venerables, aside from teaching what I know about the 5 precepts, meditation, karma, and rebirth, what would you recommend I do to expose my 2 granddaughters in order to help them develop virtue, concentration, and generosity? Is there a method that is best suited for little ones? I mean, that seems like a lot already. How old are the granddaughters? I mean, I think that you expose them to quite a bit already. And my answer personally is always the same one. Bring them to an Asian Buddhist temple. So they get like the real flavor of Buddhist practice without the sort of theoretical. I mean, there's actually also the theoretical knowledge, but we tend to, once again, convert Buddhists, we tend to get like very fixated in books and doctrinal knowledge and blah 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 here and this and this and that. And I think that's all well and good, but unless someone has a strong propensity to that, sometimes it's very good to actually see those teachings in practice, like as a lived experience rather than just a kind of good theory.
Yeah, it's really noticeable, again, interacting with born Buddhists, because you'll see them, so they'll bring a child who's often not even old enough to walk. So they'll bring a child that's 1 or 2 or 3 years old, and, and they'll actually like put something in the child's hands, and then they'll like make the child, they'll like move the child's hands over to the monk, so making the child give something to the monk. And then they'll cheer the child. They'll be like, "Yay, you did so great! Yay, you're so good!" And then the child gets all happy, and they're so joyful. And so they're not teaching the child. It's like, okay, so according to the principles of karma and conditionality, when you perform a generous act to another person, you may reasonably expect 1 of 3 results. No, they just like make the child give something and they go, "Yay, good job." And the child goes, "Yay, giving is fun."
Did you mock yourself?
Possibly. This is why I don't teach children, because I'm the one who's actually like sitting down with a 2-year-old going like, "Okay, Billy, when you make a generous offering to another person, you can reasonably expect that from the 6 senses will arise the condition of Vedana, and from Vedana there will arise the condition of," and yeah, it doesn't work. It doesn't work.
Bhante Sudaso that makes the impression of Bhante Sudaso is great.
Kusala Bhikshu recently said, if you can't laugh at yourself, wait, how did he say it? If you can laugh at yourself, you'll never cease to be amused.
Great.
He was quoting somebody else, of course.
Having a great.
Yeah. Another thing, though, is just encouraging them to notice how they feel good when they do good things, and they feel bad when they do bad things. That's something that people can relate to. It's and bring them to do good things. Do wholesome, generous things, and bring your children with you and have them participate. praise them for it. Encourage them to notice how good it feels. Anyway, let's see what we've got here.
Jens.
Yen says, Bante Aya, as though we're one person. That's great. So Bante Aya, Aya Bante, your work is deeply appreciated by myself and I know by many others. Great. Recently, I realized how much I miss going to local temples and visiting monastics.
Aw.
That's very sweet. Well, one thing that I would encourage you actually is to reflect that there's lots of people who don't have local monastics, don't have local temples. We often get messages from people who say like, oh, I live in the middle of nowhere in the Midwest somewhere, and there's no Buddhist temples for hundreds of miles. And they're like, I want to learn about Buddhism, but there's nothing anywhere near here. So be happy that you at least have some near you. Maybe you can't go and visit them right now, but at least you have them. And you know what it's like to spend time with monastics. So appreciate that. And in the meantime, use the opportunity to cultivate your practice. So keep a sense of connection through programs like this, and keep your practice strong through study and meditation, and form that resolution to keep a strong connection with the monastic Sangha in the future. Because you've seen how valuable it is when it was available and now that it's not. You've seen how valuable it is. Okay?
All right. And Gabriela says, in the practice of working with troubling emotions, I often find difficulty with clashing into expectations that I won't have negative emotions. But that seems to never help. But nor does feeding it. Feeding what? Feeding the.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure if she means feeding the troubling emotion or feeding the expectation to not have negative emotions.
So if I often find difficulty with clashing into expectations, I won't have negative emotions, but that seems to never help, but nor does feeding it. How do I find a correct attitude toward troubling emotions? Well, simply by dropping the expectations. So get into it going, I'm going to have some really negative, I'm going to experience negative emotions. And it's okay. Kind of like if you are going around your town and you know that there is like a sort of part of the town that is pretty dangerous, but you have to kind of go there in order to reach whatever sort of place that you need to do. Just go there. You already know. You know that you're foreseeing that there's going to be trouble there. So a lot of perhaps anxiety will arise. A lot of fear will arise, and that will be your practice. Instead of focusing on the negative emotions that you will experience, focus on the emotions that you're currently experiencing right now. So whether it's aversion, whether it's fear, whether it's anxiety, watch it, look at it, and practice learning from your experience. So watching in every moment how this fear turns into anxiety, which turns into aversion, which turns back into anxiety. And then you can see how it's impermanent, changing every single moment, how it's non-self. And you understand the dukkha. And then you also see the cessation of the dukkha. It's not always there, it's not always present. So you also see the absence of these states. And you start learning, you start becoming okay with it. And then other negative emotions will appear and other happy emotions will appear. And you become more and more acquainted with them. But if you have expectations with everything, you'll always be disappointed. The only way not to get disappointed with anything is by letting go of the expectations. Also, contemplate, regardless of emotions, contemplate all the expectations that you've had in the past, relationships. They're always somewhat disappointing in the past, all the expectations. Or I was expecting for my friends to come on time. Disappointment. I was expecting that person to be grateful when I, gave them such and such thing. Disappointment. Everything is disappointment because we have an expectation. But if we have zero expectation, then if that person actually, for example, is grateful once we've given them something, we're actually just happy. We can enjoy the happiness. So it's just always winning. So much winning. If we don't have any expectations. If we do have the expectations, we hold so tightly to them, it's so much losing. Terrible state.
So much losing. Like the worst ever. So much losing.
Yes, monastics also too watch the news every now and then.
I try. No, I don't. Nope.
We haven't though in a while now for the sake of sanity.
Yeah, no. So Sally says, thank you, Bante. So in the future, I will tell myself at the beginning when making the goal, I just act wholesome, and if I don't get it, it's okay. To reverse the sanya labeling that needs/must be done. Yeah, that's correct. That's good. While in school, I was told to set the goal. I have to be top 3. This kind of habitual tendency is so intrinsic. I have to say that's a really harmful conditioning. There's only ever going to be 3 people who are the top 3. That means everybody else is going to feel like a failure. This is terrible. This creates widespread neuroses. So also recognize you got some really harmful, destructive conditioning as a child. So try to see that harmful, destructive conditioning for what it is. Harmful, destructive conditioning that has embedded in you a perpetual sense of insufficiency based on unrealistic goals. So when you see it in that way, that might help you to take it less seriously. We don't have to be top 3. Only 3 people are ever going to be top 3.
Let's do top 1 billion.
No, that's not good enough. Top 8 billion. Top 8 billion. Try to be part of the top 8 billion.
How about top 1 billion in the United States?
That's pretty good. Yeah, don't worry about being the top of anything. Just focus on doing wholesome things here and now. That's it. You don't need to compare yourself to others. Comparing yourself to others is always a losing game. Always.
So much dukkha.
Yeah, even if you're in the top 3, it's still losing. Because you're comparing yourself to others, and there's always the possibility that somebody else will be better than you, and then you'll be down to number 4, and wouldn't that be terrible?
But also you would have really awful conditions in the way that you would be developing the conceit of superiority, which is just as bad as the conceit of inferiority. So let's just let go of the conceit altogether, and so much winning.
Okay. Then Liz says, I recently read about abhinya, which mentions the ability to walk on water. So abhinya is, it literally just means higher knowledge, but it's come to be used to refer to also all of the different psychic powers which one can develop through mind training. So further, Liz asks, to your knowledge, did the Buddha ever speak of bodily healing through energy akin to laying on hands or Reiki? Not directly in that style, but there are a handful of places in the suttas which mention miraculous healing, which is not directly based upon medical treatment. But it doesn't go into any description of how it operates or how to do it or anything like that. And it's not really described in detail at all. It's just briefly mentioned in a handful of places as something which can happen. So it does seem to be possible. It's just not something that the Buddha spoke about in detail anywhere that I can think of. Okay. And the next one is directed to you,
Is it?
Catalina.
Oh, it's more
It's a comment. It's not a question. Yeah.
Thank you, Catalina. And Liz says, I recently came across a comparison of Amitabha Buddha / Pure Land to Christian God / heaven. The conclusion being simply different names for the same thing. What are your thoughts on this comparison? I would say that this is the most common comparison that people of Western culture make whenever they encounter the Buddhist teachings. So I would say that we all have our cultural conditioning and what we're familiar with. And normally, whenever we approach a new philosophy, we tend to project whatever we know onto it in order to understand it. So since there are certain concepts in Pure Land that definitely match with, or actually in Buddhism in general, you don't even have to go to Pure Land. So there's a paradise in Buddhism, and there's a hell, not exactly in that particular state, but it's spoken about. It's slightly different, but I would say it's kind of like same difference. Actually, the first time I started learning about the different realms of existence in Buddhism, I thought about the Divine Comedy of Dante Alighieri, which we study in my country. It's part of our everyone in the country studies it at some point in their life, and it's very detailed with all these different, also it's not just like hell and heaven, but different types of hell, different types of heaven, different types of, in Catholicism we have different types of saints, which are pretty much no different than different types of devas. And probably they were actually mapped out on top of the devas that existed in paganism and during the Roman times, which are not terribly different than, once again, the ones present in India. So there's a little bit of overlap, but then there's also a little bit of people kind of projecting many things onto a sort of tradition and not quite really understanding it fully. Because if we don't have an open mind whenever we encounter something different, we're just going to tell ourselves whatever story we want it to be. So my take is that the overlap is actually something that has helped me, coming from a very scientific materialist agnostic. I would define myself as agnostic, but I was very tending towards the atheist sort of route. It actually gave me a lot of a lot of strength to build up my faith in the supernatural elements of Buddhism, because there's so much overlap also with so many different non-Buddhist traditions. And bear in mind that we only live in a globalized world. We only lived in a globalized world for the sort of past 50 years or so, maybe extended to 100 years or whatever, but definitely not since 2,500 years or longer than that. So it's quite impressive that radically different cultures throughout the world all had similar sort of experiences of the non-material world, similar gods, similar. We have Guanyin Bodhisattva in Buddhism, and we have Mother Mary. We have actually a Mother Mary here in the front yard, and we call her Guanyin Bodhisattva. Look exactly the same, basically, more or less, and have similar traits. The story is slightly different, but there's a little bit of overlap. So isn't it peculiar that a certain similar being manifests in radically different places in the world? So my, agnostic / atheist mind went kind of like, well, there's probably some truth to that. So you can see the overlap. But then obviously there's also, they are different spiritual systems. So once one learns, and I would suggest for anyone who is new to Buddhism not to start with Pure Land, because it's actually, even though it seems at first the most simple form of Buddhism, it's actually quite complex to understand. And actually, any form of Buddhism is pretty complex, including Theravada Buddhism. But Theravada Buddhism, I think, is the one that offers a better understanding, sort of comprehensive, very easier to understand path that then can allow you to figure out what the other traditions are talking about. So this is my take.
Yeah. One thing that I would add to that is I think it's very important whenever studying any religion or spiritual tradition or philosophy to always try to understand it from its own side. Try to understand it from its own perspective. One of the things which has caused tremendous problems over the centuries is that, as Ayasoma mentioned, when we encounter a new system of thought, we tend to try to view it in terms of our existing school of thought. So when Christians encountered Buddhism, they tried to see it in terms of Christianity. But that's not quite correct. So try to see Buddhism in terms of Buddhism. Try to understand the Buddhist worldview from the inside. Then once you understand it from the inside, then you can more easily see where there's similarities and differences with other systems. So, for example, having a pretty decent understanding of both Pure Land Buddhism and of Christianity, I would not say that the Christian God and Amitabha Buddha are the same thing. There's actually another figure in Buddhism which much more closely matches the Christian God, which is Mahabrahma. Mahabrahma very closely matches the Christian God in many respects, at least one way of relating to the Christian God. So it also depends on what you mean by Christian God, because there's so many different schools of thought in Christianity. So like the kind of God that I was raised with in a particular form of Protestantism I was raised with matches closely to Mahabrahma. But I've also met Christians from other traditions, and their description of the Christian God actually doesn't match Mahabrahma at all. It matches something quite different in Buddhism. Like it might line up more with what we call Dharmakaya Buddha, which is a very interesting possibility to explore.
Let's do a talk on Dharmakaya Buddha. That would be great.
Sure, yeah, the three bodies of the Buddha. The three bodies of the Buddha. We can put that on our topic list.
Great.
Actually, I'm going to type that in right now while I'm thinking about it.
All right, and I read Maria's. Maria says, what are the biggest differences you have found in Eastern Buddhism and the one we practice in the West? Is there a difference? Well, yes. There's a bit of a difference, I will say. One, the lay people. I should open like Buddhist born lay people fan club by ISO. I just love Buddhist lay people so much. So really, like, I would just want to go to Thailand over and over again because of the lay people that I met there. It's incredible. It's just so beautiful. So the fact that obviously Asian Buddhists are a minority in this country, not in Buddhism, but just like a minority in terms of people, as opposed to if you go to a place like Thailand or Burma or any Buddhist country, Asian Buddhists are the majority. Yay! Then that, of course, gives an entirely different experience of the monastery, as opposed to even and I'm talking about actually monastic Buddhism. I'm not addressing, I'm taking your question in terms of like monasteries in the West versus monasteries in the East. I'm not taking into consideration the whole like secular mindfulness and non-monastic sort of scene of Buddhism here, because I think we talk way too much about that. But in terms of actual monasteries, I would say that the average monastery here, in my experience, has been incredible. But it's either a place where that it's structured to cater to immigrant populations rather than the broader public, or it's a place that caters to both immigrant populations and converts, or just to converts. So it's hardly ever mainstream, which means that hardly in Theravada Buddhism addresses certain structural community issues. Whether in Asia, for example, it's my experience, that was also what I saw, that instead of patching up things, the monasteries seemed to prevent issues from arising. So, for example, food, as we were talking about, now we're doing food distribution, which is actually something that is I was like, oh wow, I'm like kind of like a Catholic nun in a way, because that's what a lot of monastics or ordained or clergy in the Christian tradition do a lot, which is offering food to people in need. You can say a lot of things about the Vatican. It's not the most spotless institution, but it's an incredible charitable operation that's incredible good to people in need. Yet, when I went to Thailand, I remember I was thinking, wow, I don't see any people that are hungry, like that are asking for food on the street, like beggars asking for food. And then it occurred to me, like the Buddhist temple, nobody goes hungry. The Buddhist temple, instead of like the monastics having to go to feed people just come to the monastery and get fed. So actually, to connect it with what Sally had asked, so the answer that I gave before, there is such a big rooted faith in the Thai people that it's extremely meritorious to give to the monastic Sangha. But by giving up to the monastic Sangha, you're giving also to society at large. So instead of patching up a problem, like, for example, hunger or like social disparity, you're preventing from it to happen to begin with. So anyone can go to the temple. It's completely free. You can be the poorest or the richest. Everybody eats at the same table. Nobody has to ask, oh, I'm sorry, I'm really poor, I can't afford a meal. You just show up and you share a meal. It's incredibly beautiful. So in that way, it addresses a lot of systemic problems within the society, but in a different way than I've been used to think. Also, in the past, things have shifted a little bit. In this case, perhaps, maybe for the worst, but perhaps in other ways for the best as well. So monasteries in the past also used to be a place where people would go and get an education. So vital centers for the community. So there's a lot of beautiful things that come from just having a lived tradition of Buddhism that permeates the life and the sort of way of looking at things of both lay people and monastics, and it's just so beautiful. And that is completely missing in the US or in the West in general, just because obviously it's a minority religion and there are very few people that are practicing it. So that's my thoughts.
And we have a lot of questions.
Okay, so we'll get into more Zen answers.
Yes.
I'll try anyway.
So Gabriella asks, Bante, Aya, sometimes I feel like it's incredibly hard to discern if I'm making progress in meditation, Dhamma study, and Sila practice. I struggle most with deceit and harsh speech. I didn't quite have an environment where I was able to keep those two in a correct way. Either I was truthful and harsh or dishonest and gentle. How do I cultivate honest gentleness? First off, bonus points for that aspiration. So wanting to cultivate honest gentleness is the first step. And it's the second step and the third step, and it's actually the entire path. Because with that intention, then you will find out how. If you keep that intention strong, then you will keep investigating and searching and training and developing yourself until you manifest that intention. So keep nourishing and maintaining and building up that intention to cultivate honest gentleness, gentle honesty, and you'll figure out how to do it. That said, a couple major things. First off, loving kindness meditation, really important, really helpful. It's been incredibly transformative for me. It was a serious struggle for me in the beginning to learn how to do loving kindness. It was really, really hard. But once I started to make some progress with it and committed to doing a little bit every day, it really transformed my character. So if you think I'm kind of grumpy and harsh these days, you should have known me 10 years ago. Really bad. Really bad. Now it's just moderately bad. So progress.
No, you're great.
Oh, that's very sweet. That's because she knows me now. She's only known me for five years, however long it's been. She didn't know me 10 years ago.
I've heard stories.
Stories are stories. Some are true, some are less true. But yeah, loving kindness meditation and self-restraint. Don't speak automatically or thoughtlessly. Watch yourself. Whenever you're about to speak, take a brief pause and check. Are my intentions pure? Is my heart filled with loving kindness? Then you can speak. So actually using the Buddhist checklist of 5 points. Is it true? Is it the right time? Is it beneficial? Can I say it gently? Can I say it with loving kindness? Those are your 5 basic checkpoints. And if you cannot match all 5, be silent. It's much better to be silent than to say the wrong thing. Much better. Okay? Anything you want to add, or do you want to move on to the next one?
I'll just say something brief. Also, pat yourself on the shoulder whenever you are truthful but dishonest. So just go like truthful but harsh. What's it?
Yeah, she said either
truthful and harsh. Yeah. Go. It's great that you've been truthful. The harshness, well, I'll try to do better next time. And then when you're dishonest and gentle, go, well done for being gentle. Okay, well, dishonest, I have to work on it. But do some forgiveness practice. So I feel like you are a little bit too strict with yourself. So you have to, as Ajahn Chah, actually, that was one of the first things that I read very early on when I got into my Buddhist practice, which was very helpful to treat ourselves like we were a little child. You want to have a middle way. Sometimes you have to be like disciplined, and sometimes a little bit gentle. Otherwise, either the child will be lazy and spoiled, or he will start crying and develop aversion towards the practice. So in the same way, we kind of have to relate to us in that way. And since you lean a little bit too much on you should be perfect, then actually congratulate yourself whenever you're doing something good. So focus on the wholesome rather than the unwholesome, and do forgiveness meditation. Forgive yourself for the less than skillful things that you do. So once you'll come and visit us, we'll do together the prostration practice of forgiveness meditation, which is wonderful, where you address all the things that you have done unskillfully in the past, and you do a prostration each time, and you kind of just let it go without holding it as a baggage. And we're like, okay, well, that's great. Honesty feels good. I want to keep nurturing it. Gentleness feels good too. I want to keep nurturing it. But sometimes you'll slip back in the bad habits again, and that's part of the path. That's why it's called the path. Okay. Then Bradley is asking, for you both, what has been one or two of the most beneficial things about going forth as monastics? I think I've spoken already about this, so you can share your part.
Everything.
Come on, be specific. A little story about the. Now he's going to tell one of his stories. So when I was a young monk, I was living in this monastery, and this other monk came, and he said something, and I said something back. The end.
So one of the most beneficial things about being a monastic is that I get to spend a lot of time with other monastics. And another one of the most beneficial things is I get to spend a lot of time with really nice lay people. Yeah. I'd say those are the two most beneficial things about being a monastic. Yep.
Sadhu.
So Marielle says, does the Sangha celebrate the birthday of when you were born into the world, or only the birthday of your monastic life, or none? There's another option, which is both. And the answer is it depends upon the monastic. So some monastics celebrate both. Some just do one or the other. Some like to quietly pretend that they don't have birthdays until other people find out. So I used to do this. It used to be that nobody knew when my birthday was. And then after I'd been in the monastery for 2 or 3 years, somebody eventually figured out, I don't know how, but they somehow found out when my birthday was. And then ever since then, there's always been something on my birthday. My ordination anniversary is just a few days after my physical birthday. So I've never celebrated them separately since they're very close to each other. That's in my case anyway. What's your ordination anniversary again? November. Okay, yours are far enough apart that we could do them separately if you like.
Great.
But that depends on when your full ordination will be.
Yeah, we'll see.
If it winds up being close to your physical birth, then we'll just do them together. And the other problem is that since her birthday and my birthday are also close to each other, those also tend to get mashed together. So it just kind of all conglomerates into this one blurred holiday somewhere around the end of July.
Anyway, I am looking forward to celebrating the Day of Awakening.
Okay. But yeah, there's a sutta where it talks about the occasions on which a deva rejoices. So one is the occasion on which someone becomes ordained as a monastic. And the next is the occasion on which they attain full awakening. So there's other things in the list, but those are two in particular.
Okay, Zen answers.
Oopsie.
There's lots.
Okay, let's go Zen.
Is there geographically a site in the world where we can connect more easily to the Buddha, like a certain place where something happens, sort of like a top Buddhist site to visit?
Yeah, the traditional 4 holy sites in northern India. So the site where the Buddha was born, the site where he attained awakening, the site where he first taught, and the site where he passed away. Those are the 4 traditional sites. And if you only pick one, then you usually pick the site of his enlightenment, which is called the Mahabodhi Stupa, Bodh Gaya. It's located in Bodh Gaya. That's usually like the number 1 spot. That's kind of like the Mecca of Buddhism. It's the place which most Buddhists try to go to at least once in a lifetime.
And Sari says, sadhu for Bantanaya's generosity. If at one point the monastery really ran out of vegetables, could you please kindly let me know? Dana to make sure Triple Gen sustainable is essential. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
That's very sweet.
And Sidera says, hey, any suggestion about using the nada sound or sound of silence if you prefer as meditation object? Wish you all good.
Ajahn Sumedho and Ajahn Amaro have talked a lot about this meditation method because they both used it a lot. I've used it a little bit off and on, but it's never been a major method for me, so I don't normally talk about it very much. Very rarely do I talk about it. So I recommend reading books by Ajahn Amaro and Ajahn Sumedho and listening to their Dhamma talks. They're the ones who have the most information on this meditation method.
And Gita says, Pantanaya, have you seen Buddha on Netflix? It's 55 episodes from birth of Prince Siddhartha to Buddha's passing. The story of Buddha's life was made in 2013. It's in Hindi with English. No.
That's a huge time commitment.
Yes.
Plus, I already know the story. So watching 55 episodes to learn a story I already know, yeah, that's a bit much for me. But
she says it's really wonderful. I'm seeing it for the first time. There's so much detail. Maybe we'll do once a month episode, and so in 55 months we will. That's
like 5 years. Anyway, I might encourage it for other people, but for me, that's a lot. I mean, I don't watch Netflix at all, and I don't watch movies or anything at all, except very rarely I might see a documentary or something, but very rarely. So yeah, no, I'm sorry, that's too much for me. But I'll recommend it if other people ask. So thank you for mentioning it.
And Victor is asking when is solar noon here in the US. It's around 1 p.m. these days. So we're having lunch at 12.
So it depends based upon, first off, whether or not a country uses summertime. And it also depends on the position of the sun, which varies over the course of the year. This means that sometimes during the summer, it can be as late as 1:30. Solar noon can be as late as 1:30 or so, depending on where you are. And the farther you get from the equator, the more unpredictable and farther off solar noon can be. It's complicated. You have to put your latitude and longitude into a solar noon calculator because it's different everywhere in the world. But it's usually within half an hour of clock time, and then plus 1 hour for summertime.
And Elaine says, I go over the 5 precepts of the daughter after I read to the oldest every night as she is going to sleep. I snuggle her and whisper into her ear, planting the seeds of virtue, aka positively brainwashing her. Is that okay? Oh, that's so cute. I like the positive brainwash. Sure.
Yeah, it's fine. It's fine. Also, again, doing Buddhist chanting in front of your children helps a lot. Kevin pointed out that his children, who are quite young, I think they're like 3 years old or something, his 2 or 3-year-old child saw him chanting Namo Tassa and then started trying to imitate it.
Cute.
And he managed to get a video recording of his child bowing to the Buddha and chanting Namo Tassa. And just did this spontaneously just from seeing him do it. So yeah, it has an effect on your children. So doing devotional exercises in front of your children.
Yes.
Devotional exercises, bowing and chanting has an impact, definitely.
Yeah, that video is everything, actually. It's wonderful. Thank you for reminding me, Bante. Yeah, Kevin sent it to us. It's adorable. And Gabriella...
this is long comments about
the child. Okay.
Children. Yeah. See, too far. Here we
Bradley says it's interesting that Mahabrahma can't access the pure abodes.
Well, that's because only a non-returner can access the pure abodes. Only a non-returner, an arhat, or a Buddha can access the pure abodes. So Mahabrahma could potentially become a non-returner, but usually they don't. So the farther one gets from the human realm, the harder it is to attain awakening. So usually only humans and the lower devas manage to attain any stage of awakening. So higher devas, which includes the Brahmas, usually don't. Their lives are too pleasant and peaceful. So it's really hard for them to motivate themselves to practice Dhamma.
And AP is asking, is there a meditation retreat center, preferably in North America or Asia, that focuses on jhanas and not just dry insight? If so, where? Well, actually, we started this place by doing a 1 month long jhana retreat led by Bhante Sudato. But also Bhavana Society has a regular jhana retreat. So pretty much most monasteries have, if they have retreats, they offer the full path, not just part of it.
Yeah, basically, I mean, there's only a small fraction of the Buddhist world that teaches dry insight. So as long as you're not going to a place that teaches dry insight, then they probably teach samadhi. So the non-samadhi schools of meditation are the exception, not the rule. For historical reasons, a lot of Western lay teachers teach dry insight, but that has nothing to do with the reflection on the overall scope of Buddhism.
Oh, and Victor is saying, we're going to go to Bodh Gaya after the pandemic. Don't you forget, I am Bhante. I will arrange it for sure. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Okay. Gabriella says, I'm not grumpy and harsh. That's very kind of you to say. May it be so. Let's see. Edward is asking, can we one day do a Dhamma talk on the Attadipa Sutta? Sure. Yeah, we'll put it in the list.
Just putting it right now.
Yep, adding it right now. Yep, I know that sutta. It's a nice one.
All right, and I think so Rupa gives a bit of a thumbs down on on the Netflix of the Buddha. So she says, I didn't watch it, but she doesn't think it was accurately depicting the actual story. In fact, there was a YouTube documentary on the Buddha that I watched. Credit to James. Oh, well, maybe that's more feasible. I would watch a documentary on the Buddha. So James, send us the link.
Similarly, many, many years ago, someone told me about a series of manga comic books about the life of the Buddha. And I happened to be staying at a Zen temple in San Francisco for a couple of days that had the full set. So I started reading through them, and it was so horrendously inaccurate. It was, I mean, the art was nice, but the storyline was almost entirely made up and had virtually nothing to do with the Buddha's life. It was basically, they just had a character who they called the Buddha, and then they had a bunch of fictional storyline which didn't really have anything to do with Buddhism. Yeah, just saying. There's a lot of things out there which claim to be the life of the Buddha, but which don't really accurately depict the life of the Buddha.
Oh, the name of the documentary is Thus Have I Heard on YouTube. Okay, great. We're going to check it out eventually. It also has small segments of teachings, and maybe it will be good for kids too. Great, sadhu. Okay, well, so I think that's all for this evening. So tomorrow we will be meeting for a weekend retreat with, guess who? Bhante Sudato and Ayasoma, making friends with suffering. So instead of actually telling you anything today, how about we all meet tomorrow at 8 a.m. and we'll give you instructions. So it will be a little bit of an unusual retreat. So we will do lots of loving kindness.
May everyone be happy, especially me. So you can have a great sleep, and then we'll meet you tomorrow at 8 a.m. There will be also another session at 2:30 p.m. and another session at 7:30 p.m. as usual. And same for Sunday, and then on Monday we'll be meeting again at 8 a.m. and 7:30 p.m. This is New York City time, of course. If you're somewhere else in the world, we suggest going to Google to do the math.
All right. Well, have a great and sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.